Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. You think politics takes the summer off, but it just don't. See, I can talk like that. To make me look better by comparison, two pasty reporters. That's right, from the Denver Post, our good friend Tim Hoover. Glad to have you back.
Thanks for having me, Jon.
And from the Durango Herald. Durango is still in Colorado somewhere, I'm not too sure. Joe Hanel.
There's an active secession movement to New Mexico, but
take over
unsuccessful
that
so far.
fork.
Yep.
How many people read, actually, how many people claim to read the Durango Herald? That's been around...
Millions and millions.
Millions and millions.
Yeah, well, our surveys show just about everybody in La Plata County.
All 28 of them.
Exactly. Look up the census numbers. It's a
How
powerhouse.
does, down in Four Corners, you know, we forget about the rest of the state. Denver Metro has about 80% of the population here in Colorado, which makes us a wonderful media market. It makes us a wonderful market for politics because you get that area. Mm-hmm. But there's still the outlying Grand Junction, Fort Collins, Durango.
And in Durango and Cortez, it's even compounded because we get TV from Albuquerque and not from Denver. There are ways of getting Denver TV. There are people have figured out how to do that. There's cable stations carry some of the Denver news. But during an election season, you'll see the congressional candidates from Albuquerque where they have just these brutal knockdown, drag-out personal ads that go on millions of dollars all year. And people in Durango can't even vote against them for that. And then right about that time is when the Cowboys will preempt the Broncos. That happens once or twice a year. Oh, yeah.
What?
Yeah. And
why doesn't the governor call out the National Guard and do something about that? Now that's upsetting.
They've had the congressional delegations trying to work on it, but it's state delegations trying to work on it. But it's either the FCC or it's Nielsen, or nobody really knows for sure what.
Both of you guys cover the Capitol beat, which is becoming a tougher and tougher beat, I think, because there's fewer reporters as there were 10 years ago. Talk to me a little bit about this. I mean, the Post has you down there. I know Lynn Bartles is down there often. But there's more AP coverage, and it seems as though a lot of the daily papers, like Durango, don't send somebody full-time during the session.
I got to correct you on one thing. There's actually kind of less AP coverage.
Really?
Yeah, because they even tend to have fewer people than they used to. And if you have now the smaller papers that don't send people will depend on AP coverage. But in the case of the Denver Post, for example, we'll have agreements with a lot of the papers that are part of the media news chain where they're essentially using some of our coverage. It doesn't replace what would be them sending someone because, I don't know all the ways their local issues and I'm not writing for
So Joe here knows that if this is something that affects the Four Corners area, he's going to write more about that compared to you.
And Joe's paper has really committed to covering the Capitol. It's one of the last
that's just a way to keep Joe out of the office. That works fine.
And it's win-win.
Talk to me a little bit about the off season. I know that during the session, which ends at the beginning of May, things are fast and furious, and it has this ending line. Everybody goes home and breathes this sigh of relief. But work still happens down there. I mean, you guys are still down there. What's going on?
Well. This is certainly one of the slower years because there's not an election this year, and there's really not at this stage any enormous initiatives that have taken hold. But like you say, there's still stuff going on. So there's a few interim committees on, floodplain shrubbery or something that's not
floodplain shrubbery.
I'm not exaggerating by much, but
Monty Python skit or something.
Sure, yeah. But then there's also stuff like the Reapportionment Commission, which is meeting. We all know about redistricting, which is where look at the census numbers and the legislature tries to draw new congressional districts.
For the U.S. Congress.
For the U.S. Congress. But fewer people are familiar with what happens when we redraw legislative district lines.
I want to get into that because in the world of politics, when it comes to media coverage, there is the sexy and unimportant, and then the remarkably boring and massively important. You know,
This is category 2.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you talk about should we put "In God We Trust" on the blackboards at school, and that gets a lot of coverage. The budget, which is the key to everything in Colorado, nobody can understand. Really, nobody has the patience for. Reapportionment is the same way. What's the story?
Well, there's this group of it's a little less acrimonious than the congressional redistricting. There's a bipartisan group of 11 people, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and an unaffiliated chairman, and
And who appoints them all?
Various people: the governor, Supreme Court Chief Justice, and 4 of the
Speaker?
legislative leaders.
Yeah, Speaker gets some appointments.
Speaker and minority leaders and the Senate President.
Yeah. So
And they have to. Do they hammer out a new map for the Senate seats and a new map for the House seats?
That's
and
right.
that's what they're doing right now. They're doing like 7 or 8 different regions at a time, and they've worked their way through a good part of the state. I think we're getting down to kind of the metro area, North Front Range area.
How many? Let's take the Senate, for instance. We have 35 Senate seats in Colorado. How many constituents will be in each Senate seat? Is it done by population or House?
It's about 130,000, I think.
Per Senate seat?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a little higher than that, but maybe that's about
yeah,
right.
you're right.
I thought it was closer to
maybe
140.
170. Yeah.
All right, so in other words, they've got this map, and it has the population all over it, and they've got to cut it up into pieces that are basically 140,000 people
Right.
each. And this is where politics really happens. How this map is drawn out will show where Colorado is going to land in the next decade,
Right.
because you got the Democrats trying to make sure that they can expand their seats and
Absolutely.
and the other way around.
Perfect example from my neck of the woods. We've got, right now, House District 59 covers the 4 corners. It's Pagosa Springs, Durango, and Cortez is pretty much a strip across the bottom left of the state. It's represented by a Republican right now, J. Paul Brown. And he basically makes the majority for the Republicans in the House of Representatives. They have a one-seat majority there. If they can get rid of just one Republican, or if the Democrats can get rid of one Republican, they'll get the chamber. So what Democrats tried to do, and still might press, they detached Cortez, a Republican town, put it in a different district, and then put Durango in with Telluride to the north. Then suddenly you have a much more liberal ski country kind of a district. Makes it very difficult for a right-wing Republican like J. Paul Brown to hold that district.
And this is art more than it's science, isn't it? You've got guys on both sides. You know, the party leaders, the party chairman, I'm sure they're looking at the baskets. This is their future, and trying to decide, well, listen, let's make some solid Democrat seats that we know are uncompetitive for us, and then let's make some that are ours, and we have to have more of ours and fewer toss-ups. Everyone gives us lip service that we really want competitive districts. Am I right to say nobody wants competitive districts?
I would want competitive districts.
Who are in this fight right now?
What you'd want are well, maybe when you say competitive districts, what people want are districts that I might be able to win and you might be able to lose.
But you right now have a chokehold on.
Right.
So you already have a chokehold. Let's make it competitive. I've got a shot
And
at
the
it.
other thing is that's really important to remember in this is, and you said art more than science, I would say it's way scientific. I mean, the stuff that they get into is just crazy. The demographics, the incredible depth of information that they have about voting histories and so forth. Because remember, not all voters are equal. Yeah, maybe by drawing the line a certain way, you'll put more Republicans into that district, but what you're not telling the other fellow is that those people don't vote.
Really?
Yeah,
so in
so
other
it
words,
comes
they
down
have to have the ability to say, yes, there are more registered Republicans, but since there are so few that actually get out and vote, this is still an advantage for the Democrats.
Right. And of course it can work the other way, but that comes down to a lot of it. It's just the quality of the voters in various districts, and they know that intimately.
Are there professionals that fly into town to do this, or is this something
I don't know
that's
if they
just
fly
done?
in, but they definitely sell software for thousands and thousands of dollars that looks at all this stuff.
So, some of the ones I know working on it are local people, but
Give me some
they've
names.
Geez,
Do
I
the
don't
Democrats
remember.
have a firm that they rely on, and the Republicans have a lawyer who just specializes in this? Because this is once a decade, and every decade the information must become more sophisticated, more detailed. There's got to be all sorts of survey information, not
I don't
just
know, they're
who's
not
registered.
terribly open about this
Right.
sort of stuff, and then they don't necessarily have to be. It's not, as if they're, it's a direct campaign expenditure, but it's all stuff that happens within the party. I mean, there are lawmakers who are extremely well familiar. Frank McNulty, Sal Pace, both of those guys are.
You're talking about the Speaker of the House and the Minority
Yes,
Leader.
they're expert in this type of stuff. They really know their stuff, and they work with people who know their stuff, even probably more than they do.
And the identity of those people, that was always really tough for us to figure out when the
Identity of which
congressional
people,
stuff
though?
was going on. The people who are actually drawing the maps, not the ones who are sitting on the committee fronting the maps.
Right, because
People-
McNulty might appoint me or to be one of the representatives, but I'm not the guy actually with the protractor and the ruler.
Right.
Somebody's presenting me with, I'm trying to argue in the committee, pass this one, not that one.
Right. And you probably know that map very, very well. There are some lawmakers who even drew their own maps, and actually the software is user-friendly enough you can do that. But the maps that ultimately, I think will be, we're talking for Congress now, be contested in court this, October? Those will come from some party experts on
All right,
both
so
sides.
on the federal level, you've got that redistricting, and you've got federal guys coming in saying, come on, legislators, do it this way. And it goes up to the Supreme Court, which is traditionally in this state been very, very
Now,
partisan.
there you do have guys flying in nationally. You might have calls from the White House on that, on redistricting. That happened.
Calls to whom? To state legislators?
Yeah, state legislators. Yeah.
So in other words, Barack Obama could call and say, listen, it is really important we keep that
Probably not
Perlmutter
him
seat.
himself, but somebody that works.
Right.
That's not a flunky. That's a significant person.
Calling one of the committee
Yeah.
members, basically.
I mean, we were told last time, for example, that Karl Rove regularly called down, and I've heard that's not uncommon in many
That was
states.
10 years ago.
That's not uncommon for that sort of level of involvement.
Because that's their party out in Washington.
Yeah,
They want,
the stakes are
right.
really big, and I don't know if they really get down that deep when it comes to
still,
legislative.
am I wrong on this part? That they always come out to this log jam, and it ends up going to the Colorado Supreme Court,
Yeah.
Which is
all
so
the time.
not
it seems.
uncommon in other
It's
states, too.
fascinating because you look back at Colorado's election history the last 40 years, no one party has dominated on a census year. It's usually been a Democratic governor with a Republican legislature. And in 2000, the Democrats won the Senate by 1 vote. So that gave them a seat at the table. In 2010, Republicans won the House by 1 vote, gave them a seat at the table. So nobody could steamroll like you see in a lot of other states.
But 10 years ago, and I don't know if either one of you were around for that, it went to the Colorado Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court chose the Democratic preferred map. That's not a big surprise. Why would I think it'd be any different now, given the majorities on the Supreme Court?
Well, I guess that's a show for this fall. Yeah, if they after they decide, I mean, that may be, and you do wonder sometimes if could that be a strategy? Let's just go for broke, and see what happens in court.
The court has not haven't put the left down on this. I mean, 10 years ago it was there, and I don't suspect anything different. Why have this charade of having these reapportionment committees and redistricting committees when it just goes up to the Supremes?
The reapportionment committee, I think, it's set up in a little bit of a more open way, and set up in a way that guarantees a little bit of or makes a better outcome likely, or more open outcome. You're right, Tim. I don't see the high-level meddling that we saw in congressional redistricting. But yeah, I finished a legislative session thinking, why did I just invest those dozens of hours in my time in covering these legislators when it just became clear that everybody wanted to go to the courts, and both sides apparently, I think, did. The
'Cause you know it's gonna be a
Republicans
logjam.
didn't try real hard.
Well, and just to be clear, it is mandated by the Constitution that they do that.
Oh
so.
yeah, now we're going to start following the Constitution? That doesn't make much sense. Why start
Just the good
now?
parts, John.
Just the parts you like. All right, let's move on to some of the other stuff that still happens this year. We are still an initiative and referendum state, although it's getting much more difficult to put things on the ballot without paying massive legal bills. Yes, I know that personally. But we're still seeing some movement on pot. And Colorado has really led the nation in some pot laws, not only medical marijuana back in 2000, but the city and county of Denver legalizing it or decriminalizing it. And we tried a couple years ago on a statewide basis to legalize it all, and that got shot down tremendously. I'm understanding there's more movement.
What are there?
Yeah, so there's, I believe, 8 initiatives, all filed by the same group of
Stoners. Call them stoners.
we'll say medical marijuana
Stoners.
industry types, as
Stoners.
well as other
Well,
supporters
they're
of.
kind of competing with it. They're competing versions. I mean, the medical marijuana community is kind of at each other's throats right now, I think.
Have you ever watched two
different
guys
ideas.
stone try to fight? It's comical.
But
All right, so they just throw DVDs of Cheech and Chong movies.
But there's basically variants of the same thing, and obviously the strategy, as you well know, is to try to see which one will fly with the title board, or which decides whether something meets the single subject rule and other criteria to get on the ballot, and so you always come at it with multiple versions, hoping that one of them will stick. So
What are these laws trying to do here?
we'll essentially
Legalize marijuana.
Essentially
Legalize it for recreational use.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
the legislature in the last session put in some pretty harsh controls on medical marijuana, more so than we've seen before.
They did, but they also legitimized it
Yeah.
a lot. I mean, there's now a state statute enacted by the legislature that says you can open a storefront marijuana shop. Here are a bunch of rules you have to follow. Leading up to that, it just wasn't really clear.
Yeah, it's a little bit like legitimizing, the airline industry, where before in the old days you'd have guys in biplanes flying anywhere they wanted to, any time of the day. Government steps in and suddenly there's regulations, but it all legitimizes it. That it all becomes.
Are we going to see less medical marijuana stores because of these new regulations?
Haven't
I
yet.
don't think so. You're going to see the only reason you see less is because of the moratoria that exist out there. There's a statewide
From different cities.
Well, and really the
Statewide
state
one,
there's a
too.
statewide moratorium. Obviously, the folks that made it in under the door are quite happy about having
Every
the
business
moratorium.
loves to make sure government keeps their competition away.
Right.
To say that businesses are pro-free market, big, huge lie. This is, and this is something that's going to happen with medical marijuana debates, is that right now, since so many people have medical marijuana cards that don't need it, they're using it for recreational
Right.
purposes, they're pretty happy. The medical marijuana guys are not the same as the let's legalize pot guys,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
these people who want it for recreational activity, if it's legal, they're not going to go through the medical marijuana shop.
Right.
So now you've got pro-marijuana guys trying to stop decriminalization. Is that basically the case?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen that lobbying yet. Another possibility is if marijuana gets legalized, well, how do you buy it? Why not, instead of having a medical marijuana dispensary, just have a marijuana dispensary?
Yeah, I
Sell it
think
over the
that's-
counter at 7-Eleven.
That's more likely. It'll still be regulated, but it would be more akin to liquor. You don't need to prove you got rheumatoid arthritis or back pain to get a bottle of Jack Daniels. I think that's more what they're angling for. It would certainly screw up some doctors that are making money diagnosing patients for medical marijuana purposes, and maybe some
But
ancillary
I
issues.
can't imagine there's many of them out there. It seems like
Many-
there's
many
the doctors.
doctors?
Right.
It seems like there's a handful of doctors that
Yeah.
do a lot of
They're
the
like-
work.
That's
There-
kind of what I think
There
too.
are more than 1,000 doctors that have written recommendations, but I think the vast majority of all the cards come from, like you say, a
A
handful of
disproportionate
doctors.
number.
Right.
small
Although the
dozen or
statistics, every year they put out the statistics of who has medical marijuana cards, and it's something like 130,000
Yeah.
now in the state. And amazingly, get this, 70% of them are boys. So apparently and which makes sense.
Men, to be clear.
Men, to be clear.
Over 18 or
because
20,
we
over
men,
21, right?
of course, do so much work that we're in more physical pain.
Heavy
and
lifting.
therefore, and the physical
In fact, my neck
thinking,
right
yeah,
now.
it just, and baldness.
This is painful.
This
just
is
right here.
exactly, I can imagine. The other part that was interesting, for me at least, was the average age was about 40. Both, and
That's an average, but what's the median? That's what I wonder about. What is the median? Is the median lower?
I thought it would be a whole bunch of 23-year-olds.
Right.
Well, and see, that's why I ask what the median is, because if you've got, I don't know what the total is, what, 130,000?
About 130,000.
Okay, so maybe the median's not a whole lot lower, but you do sort of wonder what a typical age is. It might be.
Medical marijuana is still popular in the state. People see it. I think over the course of the next few years, we're going to see the industry kind of shake out. We're going to see consolidation. It's not going to be on every single street corner the way it is now. But when it comes to legalizing pot, I don't know if the people of Colorado have changed their mind from whenever it was 6 years ago when they tried it last time.
I'm not sure if medical marijuana has helped with that or not, because you just had this kind of explosion of pot shops, some that are really professionally run, they look like a nice pharmacy or some yuppie shop. Some that are just kind of looks like the corner drug dealer just took over an abandoned shop and started selling openly, and that might be a little off-putting to people.
I think people aren't sure exactly what to make of it. I mean, some of these places, are thought to be sort of robbery magnets, because
you got pot and you got money.
Yeah, and if you have pot, you have money, because this much pot is worth a lot of money, right? You can walk around and sell it. It's harder to steal from a liquor store, and
No, I do it pretty well.
You do it pretty well.
If you drink while in the liquor store,
Indeed.
is it really shoplifting?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Deep questions.
Is it just more of the penetrating questions that we've come to expect from Devil's Advocate?
Let's bring it to we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to get into this lawsuit that I don't think many people know about. And the AG is going to be fighting off a lawsuit brought forward by some school districts, and it's called the Lobato case, which sounds like some sort of Latin dance.
Right.
What's the Lobato case, and where are we on it?
The Lobato case started in the San Luis Valley in several pretty impoverished school districts down in the valley, and the idea, they sued the state for breaking their kids' constitutional right to a thorough and uniform education, saying our schools are so much worse than Cherry Creek. We have a right to an education under the Colorado Constitution, and that right is more important than Tabor. And that's what they're trying to get the court to declare.
There's a couple of things here. So in the past, there have always been in every state school finance lawsuits, but basically the ones in prior decades tended to focus on equity. So in other words, of what there is to go to schools, is it being divided fairly?
They would call that equalization. Is that what they would call it?
Equalization,
the idea that,
equity.
Wait a second, the guys in Cherry Creek can pay a whole lot more in property taxes than we can out in Lyman or someplace, and is that fair?
Some of that, but there's other things with it, right? So cost of living factors. It's like, hey, you pay a teacher in Denver, that's just much more expensive than paying them, way far out somewhere. So reverse. We have our transportation costs to bus kids all around the rural areas are much more than yours, and our food costs are higher. We have so many more kids that qualify. So these are all the things that went into equity cases. This is different. This is not an equity case. This is an adequacy case, and these have taken vogue in about the last 10 years or so.
When you say it's not an equality, it's an equity. What do you mean? Adequacy. What do you mean?
Case. The argument is not so much over whether the money's being divided fairly, but whether there's just enough.
Good God.
And so
how much more can there be?
There could be a lot more.
It's already sucking up nearly half of the state budget.
There could be billions more, depending on the outcome of this case. But as Joe alluded to, the case, for obvious reasons, doesn't just aim directly at school funding. It has the potential, at least, to topple a significant portion or the underpinnings of Tabor.
How so?
Well, if you argue that the state's clause directing the legislature to provide a thorough and uniform system of education is, supersedes the ability of the people to vote on taxes.
Then basically, then the courts can raise
Then you
taxes
have-
without
that-
approval.
Or
of
they
people.
could allow lawmakers to do it for this instance.
That's essentially
There are
what-
many suppositions we're making here, right? But we don't know what a court would say. It might throw out the whole thing. But even if it throws out the lawsuit, that's not inconsequential. All these other states look at what happens at adequacy cases in many other states. They've had mixed results in different states, but many of them have resulted in significant new taxes.
So basically it's saying, we're going to say that this part of the Constitution is more important than that part of the Constitution because we're going to force you to raise taxes.
That's what the complaint asked for. The complaint asked to say Tabor is just a procedural right. Well, the right to an education should be assigned a higher priority in the Constitution, and the court could basically say to the legislature, "You guys aren't funding schools enough. Get into session
how can
raise
giving
taxes."
them half of the money the state has not be funding them enough? I mean,
Well,
you can't.
you look at-
can't-
You would
the
argue
whole
it's
blood out of a
You would
blood out
argue
of a turnip.
that it's not enough money, that the whole needs to be bigger, not just the half.
You would.
That would presumably that would be the argument.
Yeah, you would argue that Tabor and the tax cuts that went along with it in 1999, 2000 are
Need to be reversed.
Yeah.
All right, quickly, 20 seconds. Does Lobato win or does the state win?
oh geez, I have no idea.
The answer to that is yes.
Tim, thank you. Joe, thank you. And thank you. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute. Check us out, independenceinstitute.org. Listen for me late nights on 850 KOA. And by all means, tell a friend because, well, we're kind of lonely here. See you next week.